So, you're sound asleep in your bed, dreaming of electric sheep and robot unicorns, when suddenly, a piercing alarm jolts you back to reality. As you groggily stumble out of your room, you see it. A thin wisp of smoke wafting from the kitchen. Congratulations, your smoke detector just saved your bacon. Oh no, I didn't mean you, I meant the applewood smoked bacon you were about to so cruelly burn in the oven. But I got a little plot twist for you. That device on your ceiling intended to save your life, and your bacon? It's radioactive. I know, right? It's like finding out your grandma's secret ingredient in her famous cookies was uranium. Oh, but don't go away, it gets even crazier. As you know, smoke detectors are basically the superheroes of the household appliance world. But they've got a secret identity, and it involves some seriously mind-bending science. First of all, how the heck does a radioactive material help detect smoke? It's not like the smoke is glowing green and setting off Geiger counters, right? And secondly, what's the deal with radioactivity anyway? Isn't that the stuff that ordinarily turns turtles into crime-fighting ninjas? Only in your dreams, kid. Well, buckle up, Buttercup, because we're about to dive into the surprisingly fascinating world of smoke detectors and the unexpectedly incredible science that makes them tick. Alright, let's start by cracking open one of these bad boys, shall we? And look at that. Right off the bat, we've got a doozy of a component. The battery. Yeah, I know what you're thinking.
Oh, great. Another device with a battery that's always dead when you need it most.
But hey, cut the thing some slack. After all, the laws of the universe dictate that all batteries must die at the most inconvenient times possible. Moving on, we've got the piezoelectric speaker. And this is the little bastard that's responsible for producing that ear-splitting alarm that jolts you out of bed at 2 a.m. As well as that infuriating chirp that always seems to happen at the worst time and makes you want to throw it out the window! Sorry about that. Next up, we've got the printed circuit board, or PCB. This is essentially the brain of the smoke detector, housing all the electric components that make it work. And as you can see, it's designed to be as basic and cheap as possible, because who wants to spend a fortune on something that spends 99.9% of the time just hanging out on the ceiling? But the real star of the show is this metal cylinder, known as the ionization chamber. This is where the magic happens, and when I say magic, I mean nuclear physics. Notice these little vents on the sides. They allow air and smoke to flow through the chamber, where they'll encounter a special radioactive material called americium-241. Little on the nose with the patriotism there, whoever named this stuff. Now, before you start freaking out about having a radioactive substance in your home, let me just say this. You should never, ever try to open up an ionizing smoke detector like this one. The americium inside is perfectly safe when it's contained within the metal chamber. So don't be an idiot and go poking around in there, because if you inhale or ingest that stuff, it's gonna be bad. Disclaimers out the way, how the heck does this tiny bit of radioactive material detect smoke? Well, that's where things get really interesting. Alright, so we established there's a tiny bit of radioactive americium-241, oh god that name, inside the ionization chamber of our smoke detector. So, how does it detect smoke? Well, it all comes down to a little thing called alpha particle emission. You see, americium-241 is constantly shooting out these incredibly fast, super-energetic particles called alpha particles. And when I say fast, I mean fast. We're talking 15,000 kilometers per second, about 5% the speed of light, which may not seem like a lot until you realize how the speed of light is 660 million miles per hour. So yeah, math that one out. So, while these alpha particles are zooming through the air inside the ionization chamber, they're constantly colliding with air molecules like nitrogen and oxygen, the stuff we breathe to live. And when they do, they pack such a punch that they actually knock electrons off those molecules, creating positively charged ions and a bunch of free electrons. In fact, a single alpha particle has enough energy to create a whopping 10,000 ions and tens of thousands of free electrons. Kind of like a microscopic game of billiards, with the alpha particle as your cue ball, except instead of a bunch of balls to hit, hitting one ball splits it into tens of thousands more. But here's the key. Under normal conditions, with no smoke present, those ions and electrons are constantly flowing between two metal plates inside the ionization chamber. One plate is positively charged, attracting the electrons, while the others are negatively charged, attracting the positive ions. This steady flow of particles creates a small but measurable electric current. But once we get some of that smoke into the chamber, everything changes. The smoke particles act like roadblocks, intercepting the alpha particles and preventing them from creating as many ions and free electrons. As a result, the current between the metal plates drops significantly, and the detector's electronic brain goes,
Uh-oh, that's not right.
and triggers the alarm. Pretty crazy, right? It's like a miniature version of those radioactive symbol-filled laboratories you see in movies. Except instead of creating superheroes or mutant monsters, thank God, it's just quietly saving lives by detecting smoke. Alright, so we've learned about the awesome power of alpha particles in detecting smoke. But what about the other types of radiation out there? For those who didn't pay attention in advanced physics, there are two other main types of radiation: beta and gamma radiation. Beta radiation is basically just a fancy name for super-fast electrons. They're not quite as beefy as alpha particles, but they can still do some damage. In fact, beta particles can penetrate your skin, but a simple sheet of aluminum is enough to stop them in their tracks. Gamma radiation, on the other hand, is a whole different beast. These are high-energy photons, kind of like superpowered versions of the light that comes from the sun or a light bulb. And when it comes to penetrating power, gamma rays are the champions. They can pass through several feet of concrete, or even a few inches of lead. Oh, and despite what the Incredible Hulk might make you believe, they will not give you superpowers. No, you'll just fry. But back to our friend americium-241. This stuff is seriously radioactive, and it's all thanks to its unstable atomic nucleus. You see, with 95 protons and 146 neutrons crammed in there, it's like a game of atomic Jenga, just waiting to topple over. In fact, over a period of 432.2 years, yeah, radioactive materials have crazy long lifespans. Half of the americium-241 in our smoke detector will have transformed into a different element called neptunium-237. And guess what? Neptunium-237 is also radioactive. It's like a never-ending chain of atomic instability. I think I hear a question burning in your mind.
Where the heck does americium-241 even come from?
Well, believe it or not, it's actually a byproduct of nuclear reactors. You see, when uranium fuel is used in a reactor, some of the uranium atoms capture extra neutrons and turn into something called plutonium-239. And when plutonium-239 captures another neutron, it becomes plutonium-241, which then undergoes beta decay to become, you guessed it, americium-241. So, in a way, that tiny speck of radioactive material in your smoke detector is like a little piece of nuclear energy history. But what about other types of smoke detectors? Surely there must be other ways to detect smoke without risking some idiot playing around with nuclear byproducts and getting cancer and filing a lawsuit, right? Alright, we've covered the ins and outs of how smoke detectors use radioactive materials to keep us safe. But there are a couple of fascinating branches of science that tie into this whole radioactivity business. Firstly, let's talk about atomic sizes. Now, you might think that atoms get bigger and bigger as you move down the periodic table, right? I mean, it kind of makes sense. More protons and neutrons should mean a larger atom, right? Wrong, dipstick. Nature's got a little curveball to throw at us. It turns out that some atoms with more protons and neutrons are actually smaller than atoms with fewer of these particles. Take our buddy americium, for example. It's got a whopping 95 protons, but it's actually smaller than an atom of sodium, which only has 11 protons. So what gives? Well, it all comes down to the incredible attractive force between protons and electrons. You see, protons have a positive charge, hence the name pro, and electrons have a negative charge. And when you cram a bunch of protons into a tiny space like an atomic nucleus, they create an insanely strong pull on the electrons surrounding them. In fact, the force between just 1 gram of protons and 1 gram of electrons separated by 100 meters is the equivalent to the weight of 440 billion Saturn V rockets. Now I kind of see why some people say their attraction to one another is electric. So, In an atom like americium, with 95 protons all jammed together, the electrons are pulled in so tightly that the atom ends up becoming smaller than you might expect. Ah, but what about those Geiger counters we mentioned earlier? These handy devices are used to detect and measure radioactivity, and they work on some of the same principles as our trusty smoke detectors. Inside a Geiger counter, there's a tube filled with a gas, usually argon, and a pair of electrodes with a high voltage between them. When a radioactive particle enters the tube, it ionizes some of the gas atoms, creating a brief pulse of electric current that the device can detect and count. The key difference is that Geiger counters are designed to be way more sensitive than smoke detectors. They can pick up beta particles and even some gamma rays, in addition to the alpha particles that our smoke detectors rely on. So, whether you're measuring the radiation from a chunk of uranium or keeping an eye out for stray gamma rays in a nuclear lab, a Geiger counter is your go-to tool. Who knew that a tiny speck of radioactive material could play such a big role in keeping us safe? When it comes to nuclear physics, they prove that size really doesn't matter. But beyond just smoke detectors, we've seen how the principles of radioactivity and atomic physics touch on all sorts of amazing fields. From the mind-bending world of nuclear energy to the cutting-edge tech of Geiger counters. It really goes to show that even the most mundane objects in our everyday lives are packed with fascinating science just waiting to be explored. So the next time you want to throw your smoke detector out the window for chirping in the middle of the night, take a moment to appreciate the incredible physics happening right inside that little plastic disc. And for God's sake, don't be stupid enough to mess around with it and risk getting cancer. And if you want to keep exploring the amazing world of science and technology, be sure to check out some of our other videos like How do electron microscopes work? And How do smartphone CPUs work? Don't forget to give this video a like, share it with your science-loving friends, and subscribe to our channel for more mind-blowing content.